The manila folder sits on the polished oak conference table between two bottles of sparkling water nobody has opened. It is 2:14 p.m. on a Thursday. Outside the third-floor window, the afternoon traffic on Interstate 77 is doing that slow, rhythmic crawl that happens every time it threatens to rain in Charlotte. Inside the room, the only sound is the low, persistent hum of a rooftop HVAC unit that was installed in 2014 and has needed a blower belt replacement since last November. You know this because you personally inspected the maintenance logs 3 weeks ago during due diligence. Greg Miller is sitting directly across from you. He is wearing the exact same kind of blue performance polo he wore 5 years ago. Crisp collar, company logo embroidered over the left chest pocket, sleeves pushed up just past the elbows to give the impression of a man who is constantly in the middle of solving an urgent crisis. His hair is thinner at the crown, and there is a faint gray tightness around his jawline that wasn't there when you were 24. But the posture is identical. He is leaning forward with his elbows on the table, hands clasped, radiating that specific brand of middle management confidence that comes from 20 years of never having his authority questioned by anyone who couldn't afford to get fired. Greg does not know why you are here. He knows that Apex Mechanical Solutions, the company he has served as general manager of for 9 years, was acquired 48 hours ago by an undisclosed private equity vehicle. He knows that the previous owner, an exhausted 72-year-old named Hal Jenkins, who spent the last 3 years living mostly in Naples, Florida, finally signed the closing documents on Tuesday morning. And he knows that a representative from the acquiring group was scheduled to arrive at 2 o'clock to conduct the initial leadership evaluation.
What Greg does not know is the name on the corporate filing. He does not know that the entity listed on the purchase agreement, Vanguard Industrial Holdings, LLC, is wholly owned by a holding company registered in Delaware 16 months ago. And he certainly does not know that the quiet kid who used to sit at the broken laminate desk in cubicle 4B, the one he once reprimanded in front of 11 technicians for taking a 12-minute restroom break, is the sole managing partner. Greg clears his throat. He offers a tight, practiced smile and reaches into his portfolio. "I appreciate you making the trip up from Raleigh," Greg says, his voice carrying that familiar, polished cadence. "Hal mentioned the new ownership group wanted a clean transition. I've put together a comprehensive 90-day operational roadmap. Apex has strong bones, but the field technicians have developed some discipline issues over the last 2 quarters. If we tighten the dispatch windows and institute a stricter billable hour quota, I project we can recover 4 to 6 points of EBITDA by Q4. You look at him. You don't speak. You let the silence sit in the air between you, heavy and unhurried. You watch his smile freeze at the corners, holding the expression just a second longer than is natural, waiting for you to validate the performance. You slide the manila folder across the oak table. It stops 2 inches from his clasped hands. "Open it, Greg," you say quietly. 5 years ago, you were making $41,000 a year at that exact company. You were 24 years old, driving a 2011 Ford Focus with a cracked passenger side mirror, and your official title was Junior Estimator. What that title actually meant was that you did 70 hours of commercial HVAC takeoffs a week, while Greg spent 4 hours a day at the public golf course in Ballantyne, claiming he was developing strategic enterprise accounts. You remember the smell of that office like a physical scar. Cheap commercial carpet cleaner, burnt break room coffee, and the constant vibrating anxiety of 8 people who spent their entire day trying not to become the subject of Greg's afternoon walkthrough. Greg was not loud. Loud managers are easy to handle because everyone knows where the boundary is. Greg was surgical. He was the kind of manager who would send a calendar invite titled Quick Sync on Performance at 4:55 p.m. on a Friday, leave you to sweat over it the entire weekend, and then cancel it at 8:05 a.m. Monday with a one-line email. Resolved internally. Let's keep our eye on the ball.
He was the kind of man who would look at a 300-page bid package you had spent 4 consecutive nights building from scratch, change the cover page to include his name as primary estimator, remove your name entirely, and present it to Hal Jenkins in the executive suite as his personal masterpiece. When the contract landed, a $1.4 million mechanical retrofit for a regional distribution center, Hal gave Greg a $25,000 bonus check and a Rolex Submariner at the annual company dinner. You got a $25 gift card to Chili's tucked inside a generic thank you card that wasn't even signed by hand. It was stamped. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday in October.
Your father was in the ICU at Presbyterian Hospital with pneumonia. You had asked for 2 days of unpaid leave 3 weeks in advance. Greg had approved it via email. But at 11:30 a.m. on your second day, while you were sitting in a vinyl hospital armchair listening to the rhythmic beep of a vitals monitor, your phone rang. It was Greg. "I need the revised ductwork submittals for the Matthews project," he said. No greeting, no asking how your dad was doing. "Greg, I'm at the hospital," you told him, keeping your voice low so you wouldn't disturb the nurses. "I sent those files to your inbox on Tuesday night before I clocked out. Everything is organized in the share drive under phase 2. "I don't want to dig through the share drive," Greg replied flatly. "I need you to log in from your laptop, format the submittals into the client template, and email them directly to the general contractor by 1 o'clock. If you can't manage basic professional responsibilities during working hours, we're going to need to have a very different conversation about your commitment to this team." You stood in that fluorescent-lit hallway, looking at the linoleum floor. You realized something in that exact second. You were not dealing with an unreasonable boss. You were dealing with a small, insecure man who used his tiny slice of corporate authority as a weapon to make sure nobody around him ever felt safe enough to outgrow him. "I won't be logging in today, Greg," you said. "Then don't bother logging in on Monday," Greg said, and hung up the phone. You didn't go back. You didn't file a complaint with Hal Jenkins because Hal was 70 years old, half retired, and convinced that Greg was the glue holding the operation together. You didn't yell. You didn't make a scene. You walked into the office the following Wednesday at 6 a.m. while the building was empty, dropped your key card on the receptionist's desk, packed your coffee mug and your notebook into a cardboard box, and walked out into the cold morning air. In your bank account, you had $3,800 and a final paycheck that Greg had delayed by 8 days because of what he called an administrative discrepancy. You started Ironclad Mechanical 42 days later. You didn't start with a venture capital check or a sleek downtown office. You started with an $18,000 equipment loan backed by your personal guarantee, a leased Ford F-250, and a 29-year-old certified master technician named Marcus, who had quit Apex 3 weeks after you did because Greg had written him up for refusing to work 36 straight hours on a hospital chiller replacement. You rented a concrete bay in an industrial park outside Gastonia, 800 square feet, 1 overhead roll-up door, a desk you bought for $40 at a Habitat for Humanity restore, and a whiteboard where you tracked every single commercial property manager within a 40-mile radius. The strategy was embarrassingly simple. Do the exact opposite of everything Greg Miller did. Greg underpaid his technicians and skimped on safety equipment to boost his quarterly margin numbers. You paid your guys $3 an hour above union scale, gave them full tool allowances, and instituted a strict policy that if a job wasn't safe, any technician on site had the absolute authority to shut it down without asking for permission. Greg treated clients like transactions to be squeezed. He would lowball the initial installation bid and then bury property managers in predatory change orders on the back end once the equipment was ripped apart. You operated on transparent, fixed-price contracts. If an unexpected line burst during a retrofit, you absorbed the labor, fixed the problem, and documented the root cause with time-stamped photos before the property manager even had to ask. Word doesn't travel on billboards in commercial contracting. It travels in the private text threads of facility directors. It travels at quarterly BOMA meetings.
It travels when an operations manager at a cold storage facility calls a peer in panic at 2 a.m. because a compressor went down, and the peer says, "Don't call Apex. They'll send 3 kids who don't know what they're doing and bill you double time. Call Ironclad."
The tipping point arrived in year 3. The Carter Building, 40 stories of glass and steel in uptown Charlotte. Apex had held the maintenance contract for 8 years. On a Sunday in July, during a 100-degree heat wave, their primary chiller threw a rod. The building's internal temperature climbed to 85 degrees by noon. The property manager called Greg. Greg didn't answer. He was on the back 9 at Quail Hollow. The property manager called you. You were in the truck in 12 minutes. You bypassed the standard supply house, called in a personal favor from a regional distributor whose driveway you'd helped pour 3 years prior, and drove to Atlanta yourself to pick up the 200-pound replacement motor. By 4 a.m. Monday, the building was blowing 55-degree air. The property manager didn't even ask for a quote. She fired Apex on Tuesday morning and handed you a 3-year, $420,000 maintenance agreement. By year 4, you had 22 trucks, a dedicated commercial retrofit division, and 46 employees. You were systematically dismantling Apex's portfolio. Every time you took an account from them, you reviewed their old service logs. You saw the rot. You saw where Greg had been cutting corners, charging clients for OEM compressor parts while installing cheap aftermarket knockoffs, deferring preventative maintenance to keep billable hours looking artificially high, and cycling through 35 different technicians in 24 months. Apex was an empty shell. Hal Jenkins was in Florida collecting his distributions, oblivious to the fact that his customer retention rate had fallen from 88% to 54% in 3 years. Greg was running the business on borrowed time, masking the bleeding by raising prices on the few legacy clients who were too lazy to rebid their contracts. Then, 6 months ago, you got the call from your M&A broker. Hal Jenkins wanted out. His health was failing, the bank was threatening to call the company's $2.4 million revolving credit facility due to covenant breaches, and the commercial real estate firm handling the sale had shopped the business to 3 regional consolidators. All 3 had walked away after looking at the balance sheet and the technician turnover rate. The asking price was $6.8 million. You spent 2 weeks in your office with your attorney, David, pulling every piece of historical data you could find in the data room. When David sent over the Apex accounts payable ledger, it was a forensic roadmap of a dying company. They owed their primary HVAC parts supplier $180,000 and had been placed on a strict cash-on-delivery freeze. They were 60 days late on their commercial fleet insurance. Hal Jenkins was still quietly pulling $20,000 a month in owner draws, while the company was literally bouncing checks to local vendors. You saw the exact moment the math broke. Greg had tried to squeeze the margins too tight. The good techs left, the callback skyrocketed, and the cash flow violently inverted. The real asset value wasn't in their balance sheet. Their trucks were old, their shop equipment was outdated, and their accounts receivable was choked with 90-day overdue invoices from angry clients. The real asset was 62 years of brand history, 16 grandfathered municipal vendor licenses that would take years to acquire organically, and 28 field technicians who were desperately waiting for someone to give them a reason to care about their jobs again. You didn't offer $6.8 million. You offered $3.9 million. $1.8 million in cash at close, financed entirely through a senior secured loan against Apex's own unencumbered warehouse real estate, and a $2.1 million seller note amortized over 7 years at 4.5% interest, subordinated to your primary operating facility. Hal Jenkins was so desperate for a clean exit that he didn't even counter. He signed the letter of intent 48 hours after it hit his inbox. Total out-of-pocket cash required from your primary operating reserves,
$140,000 for legal fees, title insurance, and quality of earnings diligence. You bought the entire company that built you, broke you, and discarded you, using their own assets to pay for the transaction. In the conference room, Greg's hands are shaking slightly as he opens the manila folder. He turns the first page. It is not the 90-day transition plan he prepared. It is an executive personnel restructuring memo on Vanguard Industrial letterhead, dated this morning. His eyes scan the lines. He reads the name of the acquiring entity. Then his eyes drop to the organizational chart on page 2. The box at the very top, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Partner, contains your name. The box directly beneath it, labeled General Manager, Apex Division, is marked with a single bold word: eliminated. Greg's face loses its color in stages. First, the flush in his cheeks drains away, leaving his skin the color of wet cardboard. Then his mouth parts slightly, just a fraction of an inch, as the neural pathways in his brain violently rearrange 5 years of reality to accommodate the fact that the person sitting across from him is not a corporate auditor. He looks up from the paper. He looks at you. For the first time since you walked into the room, he actually sees your face. He sees the jawline, the eyes, the quiet posture of the kid he humiliated in Cubicle 4B. You, Greg whispers. The word barely makes it past his teeth. Hal didn't mention this. Hal told me the buyer was an institutional fund out of Atlanta. Vanguard is a Delaware entity, Greg, you say, your voice perfectly level, completely conversational. We keep our filings private. It prevents unnecessary noise in the market. Greg swallows hard. You can see the pulse beating against the side of his neck. He sets the paper down, his fingers fumbling with the edge of the folder, trying to regain some semblance of the professional composure he has relied on his entire adult life. Look, Greg begins, his voice cracking before he clears his throat and forces it an octave lower. If this is about how things ended 5 years ago, you have to understand the pressure I was under from Hal. We were managing a high-volume pipeline. Decisions had to be made quickly. I was pushing you because I saw potential in you. I was trying to build your resilience. Let me just get Hal on the phone. We can clear this up. He reaches for his cell phone. You don't stop him. You just watch him. He dials Hal's number. It rings 3 times, goes to voicemail. He hangs up, his hand hovering over the screen. He suddenly understands that Hal Jenkins took his $1.8 million on Tuesday and effectively ceased to exist in this narrative. There is no higher authority left to appeal to. You lean back slightly in your chair, resting your forearms on the armrests. This isn't about 5 years ago, Greg, you say. This is about the fact that your technician turnover is 64%. It's about the fact that you lost the Carolinas Health account because you billed them for 80 hours of preventative maintenance that your technicians never performed. It's about the fact that you haven't done a competitive market takeoff since 2021, and you've been covering your margin shortfalls by deferring fleet maintenance and underpaying the people who actually do the physical work in this building. You point at the folder in front of him. You're not being let go because of a personal grudge, you say. You're being let go because you are a structural inefficiency. You are bad at this business. You were always bad at it. You just had a tired owner who didn't know how to read his own operational ledgers. Greg stares at the folder. He doesn't look at you anymore. He can't. My severance, Greg mutters, staring at the oak table. My contract with Hal includes a 6-month severance package for change of control termination without cause. Turn to page 4, you tell him. Greg turns the page. Page 4 is a summary of the forensic audit we conducted on your expense accounts from Q2 2023 through last month, you say calmly. It details $24,000 in personal golf club memberships, weekend fuel charges, and family dinners billed under client entertainment,
without matching project codes. We have the itemized receipts and the merchant logs. You pause, letting the weight of the paper settle in his hands. You can take the standard 2 weeks of accrued PTO and sign the mutual release agreement today, you say, or David can forward the documentation to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office on Monday morning. I'll leave that calculation to you. Greg doesn't speak. He doesn't argue. He doesn't look for an angle. He picks up his blue ink pen, flips to the signature line on the separation agreement, and signs his name. His hand shakes so violently, the G in his signature drags across the date line. He slides the paper back across the table.
I need to get my things from my office, he says, his voice completely flat, stripped of every shred of authority. Security has already boxed your personal items, you reply, standing up from the table and buttoning your jacket. They're waiting at the front desk. Sarah will walk you to your car. You walk down the hallway toward the shop floor. The building is quiet in that specific way a workplace gets when everyone knows something monumental has happened, but nobody is quite sure who is allowed to talk about it yet. You open the double metal doors that lead into the warehouse. The smell of copper pipe, refrigerant oil, and cutting fluid hits you immediately. It is the exact same smell from 5 years ago, but the air feels lighter. 14 technicians and dispatchers are standing near the loading dock. Marcus is there, leaning against the fender of a new service truck, watching you with a faint, knowing grin. Sarah, the head dispatcher who spent 7 years taking Greg's verbal abuse because she had 2 kids in college and couldn't afford to walk away, is standing by the dispatch counter holding a clipboard. She looks at you as you walk up. She doesn't ask what happened in the conference room. She already knows. All 28 field tablets have been migrated to the Ironclad operating system, Sarah says, her voice steady, professional, but with a slight warmth at the edges. Marcus scheduled the fleet inspections for 7 tomorrow morning. The team is ready when you are. You look at the whiteboard behind her. Greg's old quota charts and punitive tracking sheets have already been erased. The board is clean, white, waiting for new numbers. First thing tomorrow morning, you tell her. Every technician gets a $4 hourly rate adjustment, effective immediately. And Sarah, your title is Director of Operations. Your base salary is $95,000. Get yourself a proper desk. Sarah blinks. She looks down at her clipboard, then back up at you. She doesn't cry. She just nods once, firmly, the way people do when someone finally hands them what they earned 5 years ago. Thank you, she says softly. Get some rest, Sarah, you say. We have a lot of work to do. You walk out the front entrance into the Charlotte afternoon. The rain has started, a soft, warm mist that settles over the asphalt parking lot. You walk past the reserved parking space near the front door, where Greg's leased BMW is still parked, its windshield wipers tucked under a layer of wet pine needles. You walk all the way to the back row, where you parked your 2018 Toyota Tacoma. It has 94,000 miles on the odometer, a minor scratch on the tailgate from hauling copper fittings 2 summers ago, and an empty travel mug in the center console. You unlock the door, sit in the driver's seat, and close the door behind you. The sound of the rain outside becomes a muted, distant rhythm against the truck's roof. You don't feel a rush of adrenaline. You don't feel triumphant. You don't feel like celebrating with champagne or calling someone to boast about what just happened in that 3rd floor conference room. You just sit there with both hands on the steering wheel, looking at the building through the wet glass. You think about the 24-year-old kid standing in the hospital hallway with a dying phone in his hand, being told he wasn't committed enough to a team that was exploiting him. You think about the dark kitchens, the 80-hour weeks, the cold pasta eaten over spreadsheets at midnight, and the 42 days of sheer terror between quitting a job and hoping your first customer would answer the phone. You realize the revenge wasn't firing Greg. Firing Greg was just taking out the trash.
The real victory was building something so sound, so honest, and so structurally immovable that the people who tried to crush you couldn't even survive in the same market as you. You start the engine. The truck hums to life without hesitation. You pull out of the parking lot, merge into the afternoon traffic on I-77, and head back to your shop. You have 28 new technicians to train, 3 major contracts to bid, and a business to run. That's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything.